So I'd like to welcome to join me on the panel His Excellency Mr. Mauricio Macri, President of the Republic of Argentina, His Excellency Mr. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, Her Excellency Ms. Amor Mottley, Prime Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, Minister of National Security and Civil Service of Barbados, and His Excellency Mr. Jusuf Kalla, Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Lovely to have you all here today. Sadly, His Excellency Mauricio Macri, the President of the Republic of Argentina, will no longer be able to join us. So I will start our conversation with you, Prime Minister Trudeau. Lovely to see you again. We were together yesterday in Montreal. My question to you is, how can developed countries facilitate long-term investment to support the SDGs?
Well, I think one of the first things that we have to recognize is that there is an imperative for all of us to be part of the solution. The time where Western countries could sort of sit back and say, oh, we can give a little bit through charity or development and the world will unfold as it should, is now gone. We need to be much more actively engaged and indeed creative about how we pull together solutions that are going to address climate change, move low-income economies towards greater prosperity, lift people out of poverty, as we've seen over the past decades around the world, but there's much more to do. So the first thing is create a sense of optimism and hope, first, that it can be done. In developed economies, in Western economies, you are seeing a lot of people throwing up their hands and saying, the problems are too big for us to tackle. And instead, demonstrating the real results that have been achieved is a key part of it. But being clear-eyed about the real challenges we're facing. That's why this year Canada is president of the G7. And what we chose to do is bring together for the first time finance ministers and international development ministers to talk about development financing, to talk about new approaches to development that are actually going to draw in more on the private sector, draw in more in creative ways, and recognize that there are significant amounts of global capital out there looking for places to invest. The challenges around risk, the challenges around not knowing what is a good investment are all over the place, and I know friends such as Larry Fink are going to talk about it in the next panel. But what can we do as governments to sort of de-risk and encourage the flow of capital to projects that need it in places that will see the biggest transformation for minimal amounts of capital? That's what Christine was talking about in terms of not just financing where you think you can get a return in a few years, but actually looking at where your investments can go the furthest. And that's where we've been very interested in the Global Infrastructure Hub that was started a few years ago in Australia. We've decided that we are going to open an affiliate in Toronto that will be very much focused on connecting that global capital to specific projects, to look at how we can de-risk them, how we can get that money flowing quicker and more efficiently. I mean, the amount of layers before global investments arrive are massive, and Canada happens to have a significant expertise in building infrastructure around the world, whether it's our pension funds, our private capital, or our engineering firms, or just our engagement around the world. These are things that we've been able to do. We're doing it domestically. We're recognizing that even in a country like Canada, there are significant infrastructure gaps where investing in green infrastructure, investing in public transit, investing in roads and bridges and commercial infrastructure are essential to both create good jobs in the short term, but create prosperity in the medium term and in the long term that allows for more inclusive growth, more real and fair chance for everyone to succeed. So that approach that we have is something that we've very much been engaged in. I've sat down over the course of the year with a number of small island developing states to specifically talk about the need for climate resilient infrastructure and to look at how governments and international bodies can facilitate the flow of investment that is going to make a huge difference in the lives of people in vulnerable states around the world. So this idea, first of all, that it can be done, that it's within our grasp, and that it should be done, are things that we're seeing a much more openness to around the world. And the more we draw people into creating those economic opportunities for entrepreneurship around prosperity and growth that goes through roads and bridges and hospitals and schools and energy grids. These are the kinds of things that I'm very excited about, and certainly we're going to keep working on. And if I can give a shout out to our permanent representative here, Marc-André Blanchard, who's been working very, very hard with many of you in this room to try and really secure those solid flows of private capital into more vulnerable places where we will collectively see the biggest returns in terms of global prosperity and opportunities for all.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Trudeau. So, Prime Minister Mottley, my question to you is, what steps need to be taken at a national and international level to enhance the resilience of smaller countries in terms of the environmental and economic risks, shocks, including those that are related to debt sustainability?
Well, that's fundamentally a question of development. At the national level, we've tried to do what we can in terms of bringing greater equity to our population since independence. But that's been done in a world that has continuously reduced the amount of policy space that we have in order to be able to make decisions that will inure to the benefit of our citizens. And what do I mean? In recent years in the Caribbean, we've had to confront the realities of de-risking and correspondent banking relationships being lost. We've had to deal with the implications of FATCA. We've had and are now dealing with the reality of the BEPS initiative with the OECD, which may lead, in my own country, to the loss of almost all of our domestic corporation taxes. Now, we're doing this against the background of being the third most indebted country in the world, regrettably, a situation that is unusual for us because having been fiscally prudent for almost 6 decades, we had 1 decade of fiscal profligacy that has literally put us off the back foot. Now, at the same time, I'm here, and half of me is in this room, and half of me is worrying about where Tropical Storm Kirk is going to go in 2 days' time. 2 weeks ago, it was Isaac. And on each occasion, the decision to travel, the decision to apply funds in a particular area, all of these things are questionable because we don't have the certainty, because we don't have the buffer or the space to be able to meet the consequences of climate change and at the same time meet the consequences of a development deficit. For us, it feels as though you're invisible. 20 years ago, we ran the argument of special and differential treatment as we were dealing with the consequences of the WTO and making the point that in the Caribbean, for us, our percentage of global trade in services is 0.00001% in Barbados, and global trade in goods is 0.0000%. So we don't have the capacity to distort global trade, but yet the rules remain the same and therefore remove from us the policy space to plan out development. Today, small island developing states are supposed to be at the front line of climate change in terms of being the victims of climate change, but we don't have the capacity to fend it off. Last year, Dominica lost 220% of its GDP when Hurricane Maria hit it. That was on top of the 90% of its GDP that it lost the year before when Erica hit it. And regrettably, I'll tell you that there are weather systems that have no name but have just as much impact and literally erode the ground from underneath us. So I'm not sure that in spite of wanting to see the participation of small island developing states in the global community, that the global community is ready and willing. We are unequally yoked. I want to repeat it. We are unequally yoked. More often than not, we're left to deal with middle-level officials who are technocrats, who don't have the capacity to see beyond their particular siloed approach, whether it's finance, whether it is security, whether it is climate change. But I started by telling you that this is a development discussion. And if we are siloed into a debate on finance without looking at development, or security without looking at development, or foreign relations without looking at development, we will never be able to make the ground that we need to make. So we need a more hospitable environment first in terms of policy creation. We need ourselves in many instances, and this is not to deny that there have been a lot of missteps along the way in the developing world, but most developed countries had 2-3 centuries to get it right. We're still at 50, 60 years. And that's not taking responsibility for the actions of those who did nonsense. We will accept and move on from that point. But we do need a hospitable and a clear international environment where leaders speak to leaders. If not, the problems are no longer how will we confront environmental and economic shock, but it will be how will the global community deal with lack of security and migration.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you. Vice President Kalla, my question to you. As an emerging economy in an evolving global financial and economic system, what actions are being taken by your country to mobilize long-term investment for infrastructure and other areas necessary to advance sustainable development?
Thank you, Madam. Of course, for any countries, especially our countries, that infrastructure is very important because infrastructure can be making people working more competitive for logistics and, of course, easier to the people to working in agriculture and will be compete with another countries around the countries to making this more efficient economy. And that's why we needed a long-term investment in that. For instance, in 5 years, we need minimum 400 billion US dollar. Of course, it cannot public all spending or public. Needed cooperation with private, needed cooperation of foreign investment to do that. And the situation, but important thing that Indonesian economy should be better and trust each other in between, and foreign investment and local investment can be understand and can be say that this is possible to making this situation. That's why we should making our economy, macroeconomy is more stable. Concerning the situation, for instance, the economy in the world that have so many financially, that's why our rupee, our currency is compared to US dollars, a little bit weak. Now we are trying to make any policy is possible to making stability of macroeconomy to the other things that can be trusting and the markets is still going there. The other thing is how to make efficiency, productivity, because without productivity of agriculture, for instance, the villagers, the local peoples cannot be reduce poverty and health, education much better. This is important thing for us to making a long-term policy in this fight. But there are external factors, of course, like some countries' problems in the economy will be suffering too. Trade war between U.S. and China, of course, will be making our export will be reduced because, of course, the export to China will be have affected of this. That's why you hope that we can working together how to reduce the effect of compete on each other to become countries, and then the suffering another countries of the situation is, of course, too, they will be reducing the problems on the long terms of problem. That's why we hope the cooperation this side, not only to support one country, but how the economy of the world is more easier in trade, in fair trades can be, performed and without any suffering of that. But domestically economy should be performed and will be trusting and will be making long-term investment go with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice President. Thank you. Round of applause. I'd now like to thank both the Secretary-General and Ms. Lagarde for joining us, who will be leaving to go on to their next engagement. And our visual artist will draw a special goodbye to you both. So thank you for joining us. Can we have a round of applause for the Secretary-General and Christine Lagarde?
Yes. Thank you very much.
So we will now take some questions from the floor. These are questions that have been sent in ahead of time, and if there is time left, then I will take more questions randomly from the floor. So our first question is from the Minister of Finance for Rwanda. Will you please press... Hello. If you press your microphone and ask your question and let us know who it's addressed to. Question?
No, I have rather some contribution.
Oh, please, go ahead.
So for the African continent, there are many measures to generate momentum for investing in sustainable development in Africa, but they can limit to 4 major ones. One is regional integration and the continental integration. African countries need to sign, to ratify and implement the African Continental Free Trade Area, which represents unprecedented opportunities to improve investment opportunities by increasing the size of the markets, by promoting intra-African trade and attracting more foreign investment to Africa. Number 2 is strengthening the governance institutions to improve business environment. And this includes a number of reforms, regulatory and legal frameworks, improving the partnership between the government and the private sector, to create a conducive environment to attract both domestic and foreign investment. Lastly is resource mobilization, starting from promoting long-term savings nationally. Then also due to the established good environment to attract international resources, including FDIs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Round of applause. Go ahead. We now have a special question from His Excellency, Mr. Patrice Talon, the President of Benin.
It's okay, thank you.
No, not for you. Okay, no problem. So our next question comes from Her Excellency Ms. Erna Solberg, Prime Minister of Norway. Okay. No Prime Minister. Okay, so the Right Honourable Alistair Burt, UK Minister of State for International Development and the Foreign Commonwealth Office.
I'm here, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's not directed to any one particular member of the panel, but without giving away the point of my question, if anyone's good on pension funds, it may well be coming your way. Could I begin by thanking His Excellency the Secretary-General for his leadership in putting this important topic on the agenda, and to all our esteemed panellists for sharing their valuable insights. The UK is committed to giving 0.7% of its gross national income in aid. However, aid alone is not enough, and the needs are huge. The UK government is working with the London Stock Exchange to enable African firms and governments to raise money in London, including in local currency. And as a world-leading financial centre, the City of London is uniquely placed to be the global hub for investment for development. Our development finance arm, CDC, is providing £3.5 billion worth of additional investment to Africa and South Asia. My Prime Minister wants to see our citizens have even more opportunities to invest in things they value. Tools like the World Benchmarking Alliance, which will rank company performance against the global goals, will help citizens and investors know where to invest. But let me come to the point of my question. Our ability to deliver the goals rests heavily on businesses, which create the jobs, incomes, and economic growth needed to make a difference to the world's poorest. And my Prime Minister is looking forward to co-hosting an event tomorrow with His Excellency Prime Minister Trudeau, with President Kagame and President Akufo-Addo to talk about the importance of job creation and financing in Africa. But my question is this: bearing in mind the amounts that people are investing in pension funds, and that more and more personal investors want to know what's happening to their money, and they want it used in the best possible way, both to finance their futures, but to give effect to what they believe about the future of the planet and the future of people, what more can we do together to help mobilize more investment from pension funds and others in developing countries? Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Trudeau, would you like to take that question first?
Thank you, and thank you for your and your government's leadership and initiatives, and look forward to the event tomorrow. Canada is known for having extraordinary pension funds that have invested all around the world. One of the challenges we faced when we first formed government 3 years ago is we realized that Canada's pension funds were world-class, but they weren't making a lot of investment in Canada, and there was political reasons for that, but we certainly had very real needs in terms of infrastructure. And when we dug into it, we realized that one of the challenges we're facing globally is, even though there is significant capital out there, private investors, including pension funds that have developed tremendous expertise, don't necessarily have the capacity to identify and see the good in a broad range of projects around the world that are so varied, that are so many different partners involved, that may not be in an area of the world that they actually have a clear eye into. That's where governments and an approach that brings in local investments and draws a basis of local. I mean, if a Canadian pension fund identifies this particular project in Canada where it has expertise as being worthwhile, they can go into 10, 15, 20%. And other pension funds who don't have the expertise that this particular one would have in Canada could see, okay, if the Canadians investment funds or pension funds are confident, we're happy investing alongside them. And what we really need is to be able to pull together a network of solutions that is going to ease the flow of capital much more quickly to better places. And no individual or individual group has that capacity. But all of us together as governments working in networks, being thoughtful about this and moving in the right direction, have a capacity not just to de-risk certain investments or reduce the risk, but to inform people about the opportunities that are out there to place capital for a longer term in a secure way. And I think that's one of the things we really need to realize. When you've had, over the past years, significant amounts of global capital in the tens of trillions of dollars, accepting negative returns because there's no place to place it that is low risk enough, we know that a concrete conversation around risks and around flowing that capital to where it will make the most difference and where growth will be most significant and secure over the coming decades, that's the kind of things we need to unlock, and it's something we're working on alongside you, and a lot of people are working on, and I know both Lawrence and Bill will be getting into these aspects in the next sessions.
Thank you. Prime Minister Mottley, would you like to add to that?
I just want to endorse what Prime Minister Trudeau said. I mean, part of the difficulty is lack of familiarity as to where persons can place people's pension funds. There's a high fiduciary value. And unless there's some kind of intermediary that reduces the risk, we don't benefit from it. But let's go further. In most developing countries, you have a case of high debt to GDP. You have a case of low growth. So that on the face of it, we're not going to be worthy investments. And that's why there has to be a special mechanism for small island developing states. And coming out of the Amor pathway next year, we need to be able to say, look, there has to be financing for development that is set aside for small island developing states. If we don't do it, then we leave us to the vagaries of the winds. And the winds in this environment and in this century are not very good for us. So I pray that in spite of the focus, which is critical for pension funds to make investments based on a fiduciary platform, that there still has to be a focus on special instruments for financing for development for small island states, because they're not going to negotiate our environments easily. Okay, and then when you add to that, the preclusion from concessional funding that we have, most middle-income countries who are small states can't borrow from the World Bank anymore. So you're not getting concessional funding there. You're not getting the attractiveness that you need to be able to bring in pension funds. What is left for you? But yet you're on the front line of the major problems of this century.
And Vice President Kalla, would you like to add anything?
Yes. For countries, there are two things. We have a national pension fund that usually invest in government bond or invest in anyway in markets. This is one thing that very important factor of national fund. The other thing, of course, foreign pension fund who not directly, usually indirectly investment in the country through company or through banking systems or G2G system. We hope that this will be increasing the capacity of investment, of course. For us, we are not so sure how big from foreign, because this is, I say, indirect to investment to Indonesia. This has happened, but we need a good relationship between any financial system that can be invested for a national.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to ask for a contribution from Mr. Franz Timmermans, first Vice President of the European Commission.
Let me start by saying that I welcome today's high-level meeting and Secretary-General's personal efforts to galvanize greater ambition for financing the 2030 agenda. Moving to sustainable economies is, of course, obviously good for job creation, good for people, but above all, good for the planet. Public money has its part to play. The European Commission has pledged 30 million euros as a contribution to the UN's new joint fund and as a symbol of our support to multilateralism. The EU's official development assistance is increasingly being used to leverage investment and sustainability. Our external investment plan will unlock around 24 billion euros of public and private investment in sub-Saharan Africa and the European neighbourhood, covering access to finance for micro, small and medium enterprises, energy and connectivity, cities, agriculture and the environment. Within the EU, 40% of infrastructure investments under our flagship investment programme will be spent on projects that contribute to our 2030 climate and sustainability objectives. But the estimated $5 to $7 trillion of investments needed to achieve the SDGs by 2030 will require resources far beyond the public sector. So we need a new reflection, new instincts on how to make investment choices. I salute what Prime Minister Trudeau just said about this, but we still, I think, need to harvest the huge potential of private capital and channel it to sustainable investments. I think we still need to convince a lot of people that this is the smart thing to do in the long run. Earlier this year, we presented a European action plan to connect finance with sustainability. Today's political, social and environmental challenges create huge financial risks. We want the risk of not solving these challenges to be recognized, managed responsibly, and turned into opportunities. That is why investing in sustainability is the smart thing to do, and frankly, the only thing to do that would also ensure, I believe, the sustainability of our pension funds, as the British Minister said before. Short-term approaches will only create more long-term problems. It can be a win-win, not just for our climate, environmental and social goals, but also for the long-term stability of financial markets themselves. And we've seen in the past 10 years that instability in the financial markets can have long-term political repercussions on our society. So we really look forward, as the European Commission, to working with you to get these things done at a global scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Timmermans. We now have a contribution from Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much. I'd like to join the previous speakers in thanking the members of the panel for their great contributions. I'd also like to share, as chair of the G7 plus countries, a group of 20 fragile countries, including Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Afghanistan. I'd like to state here that we do welcome the efforts that have been made. But something strikes me that we haven't been telling our story of a resilient nation, a story of a couple of nations who have been grappling with the problems that we're faced with in terms of seeing what we could do to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And in Sierra Leone, we have developed a national plan which has put at the fore of its agenda education, health, water. These are critical issues that are very crucial for us to achieve the 2030 agenda. But unfortunately, we do not have the relevant support to help us to achieve this. So I'm thinking that probably we need to rethink the approach. We need to probably direct resources into strengthening national structures, national institutions, especially in countries that have proven, countries that have tried, and they're making a considerable effort to lift themselves out of poverty. I could give you an example in Sierra Leone. It's a new government that was sworn in April, and since April we have not received any direct budget support, but we have been managing, we have been grappling. So I'm thinking that these are the positives that we need to look at, and how could we support fragile states to bring themselves out of poverty? Because if we don't do that, 2030 would not be achieved. We'll be leaving so many people behind. So I urge everyone for us to really take a critical look at how we're channeling our funds and how we're supporting fragile countries. And let's see how we could redirect our approach and our support to ensure that we strengthen the national institutions, especially with these countries who are willing and able to comply and give the support that is needed for us to lift ourselves out of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. It's now time to draw our first panel to a close. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Mottley, Vice President Kalla, thank you for your contributions, and enjoy the rest of your UNGA week. Thank you. Round of applause.